Hi, this is Andrea Kane, and I am here with you to talk about the language of medicine. We are using the 12th edition of the book by Davie Ellen Chapner to learn about medical terminology at Northeast Iowa Community College. So, we are moving on to Chapter 2. And really quick before I get into Chapter 2, I think I may have forgotten to mention this when I was doing Chapter 1's video, but these PowerPoint videos or PowerPoints that I use, I make sure that those are posted for you. I think it's under each week. You can go in and look underneath the checklist in that area, and it will have those for you so that you can bring those up. You should be able to print those if that's helpful to you. Also, don't hesitate to stop the video. Now, I tend to move through things fairly quickly, and I apologize for that. It just happens to be my nature. And with the material, it's so familiar that it's comfortable to me. So if it is not comfortable for you, slow me down or pause me if you're taking notes, that type of thing, because you need to use this as a resource for you. Alrighty, chapter 2, we are talking about the whole body. I like this chapter. I realize it may not be everyone's favorite, but I like when we get into talking about the planes of the body and those types of things. All right, our chapter goals are pretty much the same as chapter 1, and they are all for week 1. Again, you can take a look in your syllabus and see what those are, but we're really looking at, in this particular lecture, the structural organization of the body, looking at those body cavities and the body planes, anatomical and clinical divisions of the abdomen and the back. We will look at positions, directions, and again, I talked about planes of the body and meanings for new word elements so that we understand more medical terminology, which is what we're here and all about. All right, so let's talk about that structural organization and body cavities. How does that work? What terms do we need to know, and how are we going to recognize the organs that are in each of those cavities, and then how are they divided up? All right, let's do it. So the first thing we need to start with is to talk about the structure of the body. We have cells, and the cells bunch together and make up tissues. Those tissues work together and become organs, and the organs work together and are defined as a system. So let's talk about cells. They are the fundamental unit of all living things. And the major part of the cells are listed here for you: chromosomes, nucleus, cell membrane, cytoplasm, mitochondria, and endoplasmic reticulum. That's a fun one to say, isn't it? This is a great visual of a cell. It shows you essentially what the structure is if you were looking at it underneath the microscope. We're going to talk about anabolism, catabolism, anabolism, catabolism, cell membrane, chromosomes, cytoplasm, DNA, endoplasmic reticulum, genes, karyotyping, metabolism, mitochondria, and nucleus. Those are all things that go on with cells. And a lot of this is in your textbook. I would say all of it is. And it's there for you to read through. I would encourage you to do that. Cells are specialized to carry out individual functions, which makes sense. Muscle cells are different than nerve cells, which are different than epithelial cells, which are skin cells or surface cells, versus fat cells. They all are made differently to function differently. So some types of cells, they look different. Did you notice that? Their appearance follows their function. Tissues are a group of similar cells that work together to do a specific job. And then those different types of tissue combine and form an organ. And then you have groups of organs that work together to perform complex body functions. And those end up being our body systems that we'll be going through. So starting next week with, starting in week 3, we will be working on body systems. We start with the gastrointestinal system. So we'll be looking at the organs within that and even down to the tissue levels at times. So this gives you an idea. It's a good visual. It shows you how one cell becomes a group of cells working together that are tissues. Those tissues work together to become organs, and organs work together to become defined as body systems. So we'll talk about adipose tissue, cartilage, epithelial cells, a histologist, larynx, pharynx, pituitary gland, thyroid gland, trachea, ureter, urethra, uterus, and viscera. Those are all some terms that you'll be running across here in Chapter 2. Body cavities. Those are the spaces within the body that contain internal organs, or viscera. And there are 4 of those: your cranial body cavity, your thoracic body cavity, your abdominal pelvic cavity, and your spinal cavity. So cranial, just what it sounds like, it's your head and all of that area. Thoracic, your chest, heart, lungs, that type of thing. Abdominal pelvic, that's what it sounds like. It is what it is. It's your stomach on down. It's all those things that are below your diaphragm and down into your pelvic region. And then your spinal is in the back. And this is a good visual for it. So you can see, looking at someone from the side, you can see their cranial cavity in their head. And you notice that you see the words dorsal and ventral. Okay? Dorsal and ventral. Make sure that you know what those are and how you would use them when it comes to talking about the cavities. All right, next one. So what is in the cranial? It's your brain. The thoracics, your lung, heart, esophagus, trachea, bronchial tubes, thymus gland, aorta. Abdominal and pelvic. It's everything from your stomach and intestines, spleen, pancreas, liver, gallbladder, down into portions of the small and large intestines, bladder, rectum, urethra, uterus, and vagina in females. And then your spinal is the nerves of the spinal cord. So, which body cavity contains the pleural cavity and the mediastinum? Ooh. Were you paying attention? Did you notice this one? Pleural cavity. I will give you a hint. That is not your cranial and it is not your spinal. I should give you one more hint, I suppose. That would be above your diaphragm. Okay, so which body cavity contains the peritoneum? Peritoneum. It's not your cranial, because that's not even listed, is it? It's not your spinal. So I'll let you take it from there. Organs that are in the abdominal, pelvic, and thoracic cavities, and they are listed, and we have talked about these. And here is a good visual for you. And it's important for you to know right side versus left side, okay? Whoops. Hang on. My computer is hypersensitive, so is my mouse. Sorry about that. Anyway, know that your heart is on the left side if that's something you did not know. Know that your liver is mostly on your right side. So here are some other things we're going to be studying: abdominal cavity, cranial cavity, diaphragm, dorsal, which means posterior, which means your backside, mediastinum, pelvic cavity, peritoneum, pleural cavity, spinal cavity, thoracic cavity, and ventral, which is anterior. So if posterior or dorsal is your backside, what is ventral or anterior? It's your front side. So try and think about that your posterior is always going to be backside and your anterior is always going to be your front side. So what is in that abdominal pelvic region? You have a right hypochondriac region, a left hypochondriac region, epigastric, right lumbar, left lumbar, umbilical, right inguinal, left inguinal, and hypogastric. And here is what they look like. So if we're looking at abdominal pelvic regions, essentially there are 9 to discuss. And do you see where they are? It starts with your hypochondriac regions, and in the middle between them is your epigastric. Okay? So you have hypochondriac, epigastric, and then hypochondriac again. Then down in the middle 3 are left and right lumbar, and in the middle is your umbilical region, which you think of as your belly button, which makes sense. Then the bottom 3 in that 9 are left and right inguinal, and then in the middle is hypogastric. So that makes sense. If you've got epigastric, it's right on top of your stomach. It's above your stomach. If you have a hypogastric region, it's below your stomach, and it's actually under your umbilical region. If I were you, this is a slide I would make sure you memorize. Hint, hint. All right, right upper quadrant contains your liver, or at least the right lobe of it, the gallbladder, part of your pancreas, parts of your small and large intestines. Your left upper quadrant contains liver, the left lobe, stomach, spleen, part of the pancreas, parts of the small and large intestines. Your right lower quadrant contains parts of the small and large intestines. If you're a female, it's a right ovary and fallopian tube. And for everyone, it's your appendix and your right ureter. On the left lower quadrant is your small and left, against parts of your small and left and large intestines. If you're a female, left ovary, left fallopian tube, and for everyone, left ureter. So the difference between that right lower quadrant and left lower quadrant is your appendix. So you might want to pay attention to that. And that's why sometimes when somebody comes in and they've got abdominal pain, they try and palpate a little bit on the right side to see if they can feel some swelling or some fluid there or whatnot. They're checking to see if their appendix is having issues. And quadrants are 4. Think of quad, 4. So if you divide the abdominal pelvic area into 4 quadrants, you have the right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, left lower quadrant. And if you notice, these visuals are mirror images. The lefts and the rights on the screen are reflecting back to you what your left and right are. And that's important for you to know if you're ever looking at visuals and you're trying to mentally think it now, is that the left side or the right side? Think of mirror image. Positions, directions, planes, and terminology. We'll be looking at the anatomic divisions of the back and talk about the positions, directions, and planes of the body. And again, we have more word elements and medical terms. So let's talk about the back. There are 5 regions: cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal. Lovely one down there. That's a lovely one to spell and a lovely one to pronounce. So work on that as best you can. This is a great visual to help you. The first 7 vertebrae are your cervical, meaning neck. The next 12 are your thoracic, or your chest area. Then you have 5 for lumbar, or lower back. The 4th one is your sacral area, and it's followed at the very end by the coccygeal area. And when somebody says, I hurt my tailbone, you can imagine where that is at, and also how painful that can be. So you have your abdominal pelvic regions. We talked about those. You have your quadrants. You have your divisions of the back. And then make sure you learn about vertebra versus vertebrae, spinal column, spinal cord, and disc. What is the abdominal pelvic region located in the central region near the navel? You can get this. I think you know it. What is the abdominal pelvic region that is located in the lower middle below the umbilical region? We kind of talked about this one. All right, some positional and directional terms. Anterior and posterior, front and back. Deep versus superficial. Proximal, close by, versus distal, distant. Inferior versus superior. Below versus upper. Medial versus lateral, and supine versus prone. Really important that you study all of these, okay? This is a great quiz for you to point out where they are and the positions. Supine means you're laying face up. Prone is you're laying face down. All right, so make sure you spend some time here. Frontal versus sagittal versus transverse. Yay, I was hoping they had this slide in here because this is so helpful to learn from. Frontal is the number one. That's the green one that you're looking at. So it's front versus back. That's frontal or coronal plane. The next plane is your sagittal or lateral plane. It's the blue one that divides you in half from left and right. Then the third plane is the pink one, and it divides you in half from your upper body versus your lower body. So you have a coronal plane, a lateral plane, and an axial plane. Here are some more things that we'll be talking about. Anterior, which is ventral, which is front. Deep, distal, frontal or coronal plane. Inferior, lateral, medial, posterior, dorsal, which means backside, prone, proximal, sagittal, which is that lateral plane, left versus right, superficial, superior, which is also known as cephalic, supine, and then transverse axial plane. We're on to combining forms. Do you remember our formula that I talked about? You take a combining form plus a combining vowel, combining root. Let me start again. Combining root plus a combining vowel equals a combining form. And so we're looking at the combining forms. Abdomino, adipo, antero. Cervico, chondro, chromo, coccygeo or coccygo. Cranio, cyto, disto, dorso. Histo or histio, ilio. Notice that, ilio. Inguino, cario. And that's cario with a K. Latero, lumbo, medio, nucleo. Pelvio or pelvi. Notice that it's pelvi. There is no O there. Pelvi. Pharyngo. This is another one that's fun to spell and fun to pronounce. Pharyngo. Get that PH in there and that RYNG. Postero, proximo, sacro. Sarco, spino. Philo and thelio. Thoraco, tracheo. Umbilico, ventro, vertebro, viscero. Now some prefixes. Ana, cata, epi, hypo, inter, intra. Again, inter, intra. Let's pause there for a second. Inter is between, intra is within. Think of that. Have you ever heard of the internet versus an intranet within an organization? That might help you remember. Meta. And then we have some suffixes. Notice that the first three all mean the same thing, pertaining to. And then you jump down to O's, and that's also pertaining to. Nothing like making it complicated, right? So when you work on your flashcards, make sure that you know all of these four, eel, iec, ior, and os can mean pertaining to. And I think there's a handful more that mean that as well. So you're just going to have to keep your eyes open. Which term means the process of cutting the skull? And that means an incision into the skull. And that should help you. All right, that is it. Wow, we flew through that one too. It took a little bit longer than the first chapter, but as we get into these, some will get very long. I believe the cardiology chapter has over 100 slides, so we will find ourselves busy once we get into some of those longer chapters. All right, I hope you're having a good time. I hope you're getting into things, getting settled, getting organized, starting to get your feet under you. Don't forget to check out Quizlet, that app, Quizlet. My former students have said that that was really helpful for them to learn, and it might be helpful to you too, so check it out. Take care, and I'll be back in touch soon, and we'll talk some more about medical terminology.